Story number 1. Aisle number 13. I've never liked working nights, but it was the only shift that fit my schedule this semester. After all, tuition won't pay itself, and pulling late hours at Oakwood Supermarket offered the kind of flexibility my daytime classes required. Most nights were uneventful, filled with nothing more than shelf restocking, the distant hum of the HVAC, and the occasional insomniac drifting in at 3 a.m. for a pack of cigarettes or some ice cream. But that was before I noticed aisle number 13, a passage that shouldn't have existed, a place that whispered like it had a voice of its own. My name is Daniel Haynes, and I've been on the overnight crew for 4 months now. At first, I was just grateful for the paycheck. But over the last few weeks, the store began to change in subtle ways. Or maybe I was the one changing, my senses growing sharper under the harsh fluorescence that never turned off. I can't pinpoint the exact moment I realized the store had one aisle too many, but it started with something small, a flicker of motion at the corner of my eye, always at the far end of the store, near the soda section. Then, a whisper of static in the overhead speakers whenever I passed that corner. I shrugged it off as faulty wiring. Our systems were ancient, after all. One night, maybe a month ago, I was pushing a squeaky cart of fresh stock down the beverage aisle. The store was silent except for the distant rumble of a floor polisher in produce. Over the speakers, a soft classic rock tune played, the volume turned low. As I turned the corner, the lights above me dimmed for a heartbeat, then flared back. In that half-second of darkness, I glimpsed a shape near the shelves. When the lights flickered on, it was gone. My heart pounded a little harder, but I wrote it off as exhaustion. Graveyard shift does weird things to your mind. Still, the feeling wouldn't leave me. Every time I ventured near that same stretch of the store, the overhead lamps would flicker. I started noticing that the aisle numbers overhead seemed off. Where I expected to see 12 and then 14, there was a sign that read 13. Yet if you asked me the next day, in daylight hours, to find the 13th aisle, I couldn't. During the day shift, the store layout was normal. Aisle 12 was next to 14, skipping 13 as usual. Lots of old buildings skip the number 13. Our store had done the same, or so I thought. But at night, after midnight specifically, a sign reading aisle 13 would hang overhead. And that's when the real strangeness began. At first, I figured it was some prank by my coworker Reggie. He was the type to laugh at superstitions. But Reggie denied it every time, eyes wide with genuine confusion. He'd also started complaining about hearing low voices in the aisles after 2 a.m. We joked we were both losing it. But deep down, we weren't joking at all. Things escalated last Tuesday. It was near 3:15 a.m., the hour I'd grown to dread, when the store feels emptiest and the fluorescent hum presses on your skull. I was reorganizing cereal boxes near aisle 10 when I heard a faint whisper, like a breeze scuttling across tile. Except there was no breeze, the air was dead still. I followed the sound, heart-thudding, past the cleaning supplies aisle, toward the soda section. Then I saw it, an illuminated sign overhead that read aisle 13, in a slightly different font than all the others. The aisle lights flickered, the shelves blank, not a single product displayed, no price tags, no sale posters, just empty metal racks stretching from floor to ceiling. I was sure we'd never left an entire aisle bare. Yet here it was. As I stood at the threshold, a whispering noise drifted out, overlapping murmurs like 100 voices talking at once in a language I couldn't parse. My stomach lurched with a primal fear. The overhead bulbs in aisle 13 dimmed, then brightened, rhythmically, like a pulse. Something about it felt deeply wrong, as though stepping in would break a barrier you're never supposed to cross. My skin prickled with goosebumps. Then, from the corner of my eye, I saw a shape, dark, leaning out from behind a shelf in that barren aisle. I jerked my head to look directly, but it vanished. The air felt electric, crackling with static, and a hush fell. Even the store music seemed to die away, replaced by a subaudible hum pressing on my eardrums. I stumbled back, nearly tripping over a mop bucket. That was enough for me. I fled to the front, where Reggie was dozing at the service counter. I shook him awake, breathless. "Dude, you have to see this," I gasped. But when we returned to the corridor, the sign reading 13 was gone. In its place hung the standard 14. The aisle was once again stocked with soda and chips. Reggie shot me a concerned look. I could only shrug, my mind spinning with questions. Had I hallucinated? Or was something more sinister afoot? For a while, I avoided that side of the store whenever possible. But the next night, I found myself drawn there, some twisted curiosity, maybe. Sure enough, around 2:45 a.m., the overhead lights flickered, and the sign changed again. The soda aisle's merchandise vanished, replaced by those stark, empty shelves. I froze at the border, heart pounding. The whispering was louder, swirling in overlapping tones. Before I could bolt, the store lights blacked out for a full second. In that darkness, something brushed past me, cold as ice, leaving my hair on end. When the lights snapped on again, I caught a glimpse of black shapes flitting among the racks in the middle of that aisle, just at the edge of my vision. I wish I could say I found the courage to explore further, but I didn't. I turned and ran, stumbling, nearly knocking over a towering display of cat food. That entire shift, I felt watched. The sense of an invisible gaze following me from the shadows. Even Reggie noticed me jumpy, though I lied and said I was sick. Desperate for an explanation, I dug through old store records. Our manager, Cynthia, kept a dusty filing cabinet in the back office with store layout documents. But nothing indicated an aisle 13. No mention of a secret stock plan. If the store was built with superstitious numbering, omitting 13, where did this ghost aisle come from? I found no answers. I even cornered the building's maintenance guy, Ted, who'd worked here for decades. He insisted the building had always skipped from 12 to 14. That's how we do it, he said. Everyone's weird about that unlucky number. He scoffed at my story, though his eyes flickered with unease. Ted had his own superstitions, apparently. Night after night, the phenomenon repeated. At about 2 o'clock or 3 a.m., the sign for aisle 13 would appear, and the contents within would vanish, replaced by emptiness. Sometimes, the overhead lights flickered. Sometimes, the sound system erupted in static. Shadows danced across the floor, just beyond the threshold. And always, those disembodied murmurs. They formed no coherent words, but the tone was urgent, almost pleading or threatening. The real terror came a week later. I was alone in the store, Reggie out to pick up fresh produce from the loading dock, when I heard a crash from aisle 12. I rushed over, expecting a broken jar or maybe a raccoon that had snuck in. Instead, I found a single shattered light bulb on the tile, the rest flickering overhead. Past that was aisle 13, sign bright as day. Its shelves loomed, empty rows stretching into a hazy distance. But wait, that aisle looked far longer than physically possible. Our store measured maybe 70 feet from front to back. This aisle seemed to recede into darkness, going on for an impossible distance. My nerves screamed. Something was very wrong with the geometry. Before I could flee, a figure stepped out from behind a shelf about 20 feet in. My heart seized. It looked human, wearing what seemed to be the store's uniform, but the face was oddly blurred in the flickering lights. The figure beckoned me forward with a jerky motion, as if calling me to come deeper into the aisle. Fear clenched my insides, but some mesmerizing pull tugged at me, like a mild compulsion that whispered, "Look. See." Step by halting step, I approached. The figure receded further into the aisle, always just out of reach, leading me deeper. My mind screamed to turn around. Yet I kept going, the hush intensifying. The overhead fluorescent tubes flickered in waves. The racks were definitely empty, not even dust motes. Just metal shelving that stretched impossibly far. The whispering voices grew louder, swirling into a cacophony that vibrated in my skull. Then, the figure halted, turning to face me. A flicker of the lights revealed it had no facial features, just a blank, shadowy surface. My breath caught in my throat. The figure raised an arm, pointing to the floor. I looked down, trembling. At my feet lay a swirling darkness, like a patch of oil that reflected no light. The shape of it was shifting, roiling. The figure gestured again, impatient. That's when I realized it wanted me to step onto the blackness. My survival instincts kicked in. I stumbled backward, nearly tipping over. The figure advanced, silent but urgent, as if frustrated I wouldn't comply. Then the overhead lights flared bright, forcing me to blink. In that split second of illumination, the figure dissolved into a swirl of shadows. The entire aisle seemed to warp, shrinking back to normal dimensions. My next breath came ragged. Shaking, I turned and bolted, hard hammering. The sign overhead read aisle 13 no longer, just the normal aisle 14 sign greeting me at the exit. That night, I told Reggie everything. I expected mockery or scorn. Instead, his face went pale. He confessed he, too, had glimpsed the aisle, but never ventured in. He heard me calling out, though I didn't recall speaking. He wanted to approach, but something held him back. "It's like the store wouldn't let me near," he said. The two of us realized we were in over our heads. We debated telling Cynthia. But if we said the store had a secret gateway that appeared after midnight, she'd fire us for sure, assuming we were insane or on drugs. So we decided to investigate ourselves, maybe record it on camera for proof. The next evening, we brought phones fully charged, ready. Sure enough, around 2:30 a.m., the lights dimmed near the far side of the store. We crept up, phone cameras rolling. The sign reading aisle 13 was there, luminous in the gloom. We got it on video, hearts pounding. But when we played it back, the footage showed only a flickering overhead sign reading aisle 14. The aisle looked fully stocked with soda. Our video displayed no anomaly. We cursed, suspecting whatever force behind this phenomenon refused to be documented. Reggie grew paranoid, suspecting the aisle was some dimensional rift. I teased him at first, but deep down, I believed it, too. Something about it felt beyond normal haunting. If it were a ghost, we'd see apparitions or poltergeist activity. Instead, we found a literal rewrite of store space. A new aisle, hidden between 12 and 14. And the shadows that lurked within, not exactly ghosts. Something else. Our final straw came on a Wednesday. Another coworker, Haley, had come in for an extra shift. We didn't warn her about the aisle. Maybe we were ashamed or worried she'd think us crazy. At around 3 a.m., we realized Haley was nowhere to be found. Her cart of towels stood abandoned near bakery. We searched the store, calling her name. No response. We tried the break room, bathrooms, nothing. As we approached the soda aisle, our stomachs lurched. The overhead sign read aisle 13. My chest tightened. Could Haley have stumbled in? We rushed in, ignoring the swirl of dread. The shelves were bare, that hush thick. The whispering grew louder, frantic. We followed the aisle deeper, deeper than the store's layout allowed. Our footsteps echoed. At some point, Reggie grabbed my arm. "Look," he hissed. A few yards ahead, Haley stood, partially turned away. She was unmoving, almost statue-like. "Haley," we called. She didn't respond. The overhead lights flickered madly. We ran to her. She stared forward, eyes unfocused, face pale as chalk. I shook her shoulders. "Haley!" "Snap out of it!" For a moment, she didn't react. Then her eyes shifted to me, wide with terror. "They're here," she whispered, voice quivering. "They want to come through." Before I could ask who, she pointed to the floor. That same swirling black void spread across the tiles, larger now, swirling like a fluid shadow. My heart thundered. In that darkness, shapes writhed, tendril-like forms pressing upward, as though an entire realm of nightmares lay beneath the store's floor. Eager to break free. Reggie cursed under his breath. We tried pulling Haley away, but she stumbled, nearly dropping onto that swirling blackness. A single tendril of shadow lashed out, grazing her ankle. She screamed, yanking her foot away. The overhead lights popped, some shattering and raining sparks. The aisle erupted in chaos, the whispering crescendoing to a roar of 1,000 voices. The black void bubbled, shadows reaching for us. Summoning all courage, I flung Haley's arm over my shoulder and yelled at Reggie to run. We fled back the way we came, ignoring the strobe of the dying fluorescence. The sign overhead flickered. We burst into the main store area. Haley whimpered, tears streaming, repeating, "They're so close, they're so close." We collapsed near the registers. Moments later, the store lights returned to normal. Aisle 13 was gone. The store layout was as usual. Haley sank to the floor, trembling, refusing to speak more. Reggie and I hovered, not sure what to do. We ended up driving her home, lying to Cynthia that she'd gotten sick. We decided we couldn't let this continue. If that aisle was truly a gateway to some other dimension, full of monstrous entities, we had to stop it. But how? We were just minimum wage employees. But we had to try something before an unsuspecting shopper or coworker vanished forever. That next night, we armed ourselves with a plan. We brought a bucket of salt from the cleaning closet. Hey, we'd read online about salt lines repelling evil. We also grabbed flashlights, though we knew the aisle might sabotage electronics. Our idea was simple. Once the aisle manifested, we'd form a barrier of salt around its perimeter, hoping to block the threshold. Ridiculous? Sure. But we had no better plan. At 2:50 a.m., we waited. Our hearts pounded. Right on schedule, the sign for aisle 13 flickered to life. The soda shelves vanished. The overhead lights dimmed. We stepped forward, opening the bucket of salt. Reggie began pouring a line across the tile near the aisle's entrance. Instantly, the store lights flickered angrily, like the building objected. The whispers rose, swirling with a frantic pitch. I pressed on, pouring a continuous line, forming a half-circle in front of the aisle. The air turned ice-cold. Shadows flickered at the aisle's edges, shapes with elongated limbs reaching out, furious at our interference. Just as we completed the barrier, the overhead bulbs exploded with a deafening pop, plunging us into darkness. My flashlight flickered wildly. In the gloom, I saw those shadow creatures writhing, pressed against an invisible boundary where the salt lay. They hissed silently, features abstract, eyes non-existent. Fear hammered in my chest. I had never been so close to them in full view. Reggie clung to me, muttering curses. Then, behind them, I saw the black void swirling on the floor, expanding outward. They wanted through en masse. But the salt line seemed to hold. The creatures couldn't cross. They howled in silent rage, pressing themselves to the invisible barrier, flickering. My mind reeled. This was insane. We were blocking an interdimensional incursion with a $5 bag of salt. The swirl of blackness churned, tendrils lashing, but they found no purchase. A final strobe flickered through the store, and then, abruptly, everything snapped back to normal. The sign for aisle 13 vanished. The store lights returned, albeit flickering overhead, revealing our same mundane layout. We exhaled in relief. The next nights, no sign of the cursed aisle. We told Haley we'd sealed it. She just nodded, relieved but still shaken. For a few weeks, the store felt normal again. We joked that maybe the evil was gone for good. But a lingering sense of unease remained. Occasionally, I'd notice a flicker near the cereal aisle or a faint whisper past the soda shelves. We suspect we only sealed it temporarily, that the forces beyond might try again. Some nights, I dream of those shadow creatures, their soundless moans, their frantic attempts to break through the thin veil that separates our reality from theirs. Aisle 13, that label burned into my mind. I've told no one else about the events. CYN would never believe us, corporate would laugh us out. Reggie and I keep watch. We keep a fresh supply of salt hidden in the stockroom, just in case. And every so often, near 3 a.m., we stand by the corner, scanning the overhead signs, ready to fight if that wretched owl reappears. It's a fragile peace, knowing we might only have delayed the inevitable. But for now, the bizarre gateway remains closed, and Oakwood Supermarket's patrons go about their nocturnal shopping blissfully unaware. We, the night crew, keep silent vigil. Because who would believe us if we told the truth? That an aisle with no items and a number nobody uses turned out to be a cosmic door to a dimension of nightmares? I often wonder what would happen if we missed a single night. What if we took a day off, and that aisle manifested with no one to stop it? Would the entire store vanish by morning, or worse, would those creatures roam free in the world outside? The possibilities keep me awake, my mind spinning with dread. So, if you ever find yourself in a 24-hour supermarket at 3 a.m., scanning overhead signs for your favorite brand of cereal, pay attention. If you catch a glimpse of 13 where it shouldn't be, if your cart's wheel squeaks in that lonely corridor of empty shelves, and you hear hushed voices echoing from shadows, turn around. Don't venture forward. Some paths are never meant to be walked, some doors should never be opened. Because behind them lurk things you can't unsee, horrors that rattle the boundaries of reality. And if by chance the store's lights flicker, and you sense a presence just at the corner of your vision, remember, aisle number 13 is real. I've seen it. I've felt its whispered call. It's out there, biding its time, waiting for another chance to breach the gap between worlds. And in the meantime, I'll be here, on the night shift, salt in hand, praying it never does. Story number 2. The customer that never leaves. It's almost a cliche to say that working the night shift warps your sense of reality, but I never truly got it until I started as a graveyard associate at a 24-hour Walmart. My name is Jamie, and I've clocked in at our store 6 nights a week for over a year now. Before this, I was a regular college kid juggling day classes and part-time gigs, but when life threw me a curveball, tuition, and ailing parent, I switched to full-time nights. The pay was steady, and it left my days open for classes and errands. Plus, I told myself, working at a busy Walmart location might even be fun, in its own weird way. I learned quickly that busy was relative. Sure, from morning until around 10 at night, the store bustles with families and random shoppers. But after midnight, everything changes. The lights don't dim, of course, they stay harsh and fluorescent, humming in an unending drone that sets your teeth on edge. But the aisles grow quiet, footsteps echo, and the loudspeaker occasionally squawks out a scratchy announcement about stockroom changes or a manager's call. You see a ragtag mix of insomniacs, the occasional night owl on an emergency grocery run, or drifters seeking a warm place to kill time. Then there's the skeleton crew of employees, me, a couple of stockers in electronics or produce, and maybe one manager who's half asleep in the security booth. For the first few weeks, everything felt normal, if lonely, and a bit eerie. I'd show up at 10:30 p.m., greet my manager, Manny, and start by straightening shelves in the home and garden area, raking mulch bags or rearranging patio sets. Around 2 a.m., I'd drift over to the grocery side for reshuffling cereal boxes, making sure the end caps looked tidy. Then I'd clock out at 7 a.m., exhausted, stepping into the morning sun like a vampire forced from its lair. But some months ago, I started seeing this man. Or maybe noticing him is more accurate. I suspect he'd been around long before I was conscious of him. It began subtly, a lanky figure in a faded gray hoodie at the far end of an aisle, scanning shelves but never putting anything in a cart. Another time, I'd spot him in produce, aimlessly turning over an apple before setting it back, apparently bored. He was quiet, always quiet. I never heard him speak to employees or approach the register. He'd come around midnight, drift through the aisles, and by dawn, I'd never see him leave. At first, I figured he was just another restless night wanderer, the type who haunted the store because they had nowhere else to go. But something about him gave me chills, the way his face remained in partial shadow, no matter how bright the lights. How he never smiled, never frowned, just wore a neutral expression of vacancy. Once or twice, I tried to greet him, just a friendly "Hey, need help finding anything?" But he never responded. He'd slip around the corner, vanish behind a display of detergent, or fade into the next aisle. It grew strangely unnerving. Our store might be big, but it's not so big that a person can vanish without a trace. Yet that's exactly what he'd do. I'd check the next aisle, empty. The next, empty. No sign of him by the exit either. Then, an hour later, I'd catch him again near frozen foods, staring at a wall of microwavable meals, not moving a muscle. I mentioned it to Manny, half expecting him to wave it off. He stiffened oddly, then said, "You sure you saw someone?" "Because I've heard rumors, but never mind." He gave a short laugh. "We get weird folks all the time. As long as he's not stealing, let him be." Manny's reaction was cagey, though. It was as if he knew more than he let on. Curiosity got the better of me. I started watching for the man specifically. The store's security cameras, I discovered, never seemed to catch him. Manny would amuse me by letting me peek at the monitors if we were bored. But every time I'd say, "Wait," he's in aisle 9 right now. Manny'd switch the camera feed, and we'd see nothing except empty aisle floors. No sign of that gray hoodie figure. Manny would rub his eyes, grumbling about faulty cameras or how maybe the man was a wizard at avoiding them. Then one night, everything changed. I was in the candy aisle, reorganizing a messy pile of chocolates. The overhead PA system was quiet. We had only a handful of customers in the building, 2 older women in pharmacy, 1 teen rummaging the video game section, and maybe a homeless guy dozing in the corner near the restrooms. Out of the corner of my eye, I spotted him, the same man, maybe 40-ish, tall, slouched posture, that gray hoodie torn at the elbow. He was standing at the far end, near the novelty candy racks, just staring. His gaze locked on me. My stomach flipped. Something about his eyes felt hollow, not like a druggie or a tired soul, but emptier than that. I mustered a polite nod. "Need help finding something?" My voice echoed in the aisle. For a beat, he didn't respond. Then he took a slow step forward. Another. His footsteps made no sound. My palms went clammy. Finally, in a voice just above a whisper, he said, "I've been here too long." I blinked. "What do you mean?" But he turned abruptly and walked off, heading toward the sporting goods section. I rushed after him, my sneakers squeaking on the polished floor. Rounding the corner, I expected to see him by the tents or fishing rods. But he was gone. The aisle was empty. The air felt cold, though the store's thermostat always hovered near 70. I exhaled shakily. Fine. Maybe I was imagining the goosebumps, the temperature drop. "Get a grip, Jamie," I whispered to myself. But from that moment on, weird incidents piled up. A coworker said he heard footsteps behind him in the electronics department, but no one was there. Another time, Manny found the same gray hoodie man loitering by the garden center at 4 a.m., staring out the locked glass doors. Manny asked if he needed help. The man turned, walked away, and Manny swore he vanished in less than 10 seconds, with no place to hide. Manny was rattled enough to do a full store check, worried about a potential shoplifter. We found no one matching that description. Rumors spread among the night crew. Some said they once glimpsed him near the deli, muttering under his breath, or that sometimes they heard faint sobs in the aisles. One older associate, Clara, who'd been around for a decade, confided quietly that we had a store ghost. She told me a hush-hush story, years ago, maybe 5? Maybe more, a robbery had gone down late at night. The details were murky, but rumors said a shopper got shot, the robber fled, and the shopper died in the aisles before paramedics arrived. Management had hushed it up to avoid scaring customers. She didn't know the victim's name or the exact aisle. But she said sometimes the ghost of that man walked the store, never able to leave. I scoured local news archives in my off time, searching Walmart robbery, death in store, anything that might confirm Clara's tale. Found nothing conclusive. But I grew more convinced that the man in the gray hoodie was indeed a spirit, some restless presence bound to the place of his death. Each night, I'd watch for him, trying to catch any detail. He rarely spoke, and if I attempted to approach, he'd vanish behind a shelf or slip away. But once, around 2 a.m. on a Tuesday, I found him standing near the hardware aisle. Instead of running, he turned, locked eyes with me. I forced myself to speak calmly. "Hello? Are you okay?" My pulse hammered so loud I was sure he'd hear it. He looked at me with that same empty expression, then parted his lips. "I can't leave," he whispered. My breath caught. I managed a shaky nod. "Is there anything I can do?" For the first time, his eyes flickered with something like hope. "I lost something," he said, voice wavering. "Find it, maybe I can go." Then, like a gust of wind snuffing a candle, he was gone, my vision blurred, I blinked, and the aisle was empty. My ears hummed in the sudden silence. He lost something. That was a clue. If this was a spirit, maybe it needed closure. I recalled enough ghost story tropes to guess, maybe his wallet, a personal item, or something left behind. Over the next nights, I searched discreetly, rummaging behind shelves, checking corners. Manny asked why I was so fixated on rearranging certain aisles. I just shrugged. Reggie teased me about treasure hunting. I said nothing about the ghost, not wanting to spook the others. Eventually, near the clearance aisle behind seasonal decor, I found something. Wedged under a dusty shelf was a small, battered photo, grainy, possibly a wallet photo of a young child, smiling, front teeth missing. The back read Luke, age 5. My heart pounded. Could this be it? Something about that picture felt deeply significant, like it radiated quiet sorrow. I pocketed it, unsure but hopeful. That night, I carried the photo around, waiting for the gray hoodie man to appear. He surfaced around 3 a.m. near the bakery. I mustered courage, stepping forward quickly before he could vanish. Is this yours? I whispered, holding the picture out. He hesitated, then lifted his gaze to the photo. His eyes widened with raw emotion. Slowly, he reached a pale hand to take it. Luke, he murmured, voice cracking. My boy. Tears burned my eyes. I'm sorry, I said. Before I could finish, he closed his hand around the picture, a trembling sigh escaping him. The overhead fluorescent lights flickered. He looked at me, something like gratitude crossing his face. Then the store's PA system crackled with static, and in that instant, the man began to fade, like dust blowing away in a strong wind. I gasped. Wait. But I could do nothing. He vanished, leaving the faintest whisper, thank you. After that, for weeks, I saw no sign of the mysterious man. The night shift felt almost normal again. Manny and Reggie noticed I was more relaxed. Clara said quietly she heard fewer footsteps in the aisles. Maybe the spirit had indeed moved on. Part of me missed his presence, if only because it was such a profound experience to brush shoulders with the supernatural. But my sense of relief was short-lived. Late one Friday, I spotted a shape that looked eerily like him in the security camera feed for electronics. Manny was half asleep, but I shook him awake. Look! I hissed. We stared. The shape flickered across the screen, glitching in and out, forming a silhouette. Then the feed cut to static. Manny cursed, pounding the console. By the time the image returned, everything was normal, no sign of the figure. But I felt the old dread creeping back. If he was still here, did that mean we hadn't actually freed him? That night, I walked the store, calling softly. Hello? Are you there? We found the photo. Do you need something else? No response. Just the hum of the overhead fans. For a week, nothing happened. Then, one quiet shift, around 2:45 a.m., as I was tidying the men's clothing section, I heard a faint sobbing. I followed the sound past pajamas and socks, then around a corner. Standing there, near a rack of hoodies, was the gray hoodie man, but his figure seemed dimmer, less substantial. His head was bowed. I stepped closer, my heart in my throat. You're still here? I said softly. He lifted his face. To my shock, he looked more distressed, eyes hollow, black circles beneath them. I tried, he rasped. But I can't leave. I swallowed. But the photo? I thought. He shook his head. Not enough. He cast his eyes around. My blood stained these floors. My final breath was here. I can't move on. A chill skidded up my spine. Who are you? His lips quivered. I was Henry Taylor. Just a guy picking up groceries after a late shift. A pained laugh. Wrong place, wrong time. Some punk with a gun. He clenched his fists. I never got to say goodbye to my boy, Luke. I closed my eyes, tears threatening. I'm sorry. He shrugged, a gesture heavy with sorrow. I roamed these aisles every night, searching for an exit. But the doors never opened for me, not truly. I recalled the store's automatic doors, how they never locked, but maybe for him, they might as well be sealed. Is there anything else we can do? His gaze flicked to the overhead speakers, the flickering lights. People come here, live their lives, then leave. I watch them, see them return to their families. I never can. His voice cracked. Maybe if the truth came out, about how I died, or if this store recognized me. I don't know. I just need help. I nodded, face hot. Okay. Let me try something. He blinked out of sight, leaving me alone with a trembling resolve. The next day, I confronted Manny. We have a ghost, I said bluntly. He sighed, arms folded, but I pressed on, telling him about Henry Taylor, the lost photo, how the rumor of a hush-hush robbery matched the details of a man shot in the store. Manny looked torn, then eventually admitted that corporate had suppressed news coverage to avoid bad press. Manny had only been assistant manager then, sworn to secrecy. He never knew the victim's name, but he recalled the victim had a child. Manny's voice wavered. We never properly memorialized him. The store was sanitized of the incident, as if it never happened. I told Manny we needed to set up a small tribute, maybe a plaque or a donation box for the victim's family. Manny, guilt evident in his eyes, agreed. That night, Manny drafted a letter to corporate, requesting we be allowed to place a small memorial near the front. He got no immediate response. So Manny, Reggie, and I took it upon ourselves to create a discreet display, a framed sign reading, "In memory of Henry Taylor, a father taken too soon." We placed it near the aisle where Manny remembered the shooting took place. Manny also wrote a heartfelt note acknowledging the store's regret. We pinned the photo of Luke, which I'd found, to the corner of the frame, including a note that read, "Your dad loved you." I felt silly, half expecting corporate to tear it down by morning. But Manny said, "Let them try. Enough is enough." That night, I patrolled the aisles, heart racing. Near midnight, I found Henry in the same hoodie, drifting by. I gestured for him to follow, led him to the small memorial. He stared at it. The overhead lights flickered in that telltale way, a hush falling. Then, in a voice thick with gratitude, he said, "You did this?" I nodded. "We want people to know you were here, that you mattered." He reached out, fingertips grazing the photo of Luke. The fluorescent bulbs above us dimmed, then stabilized, as if the store itself was holding its breath. Henry's expression softened, tears shining in his eyes, though no tears fell. "Thank you," he whispered. "I think. I feel." He trailed off. Then, with a slow exhale, he looked at me. "I can see a door, behind you." I glanced over my shoulder, just a blank stretch of wall. But Henry's gaze fixed on something else. "I think it leads home," he said, voice trembling with hope. My throat tightened. "Go," I urged him. He nodded, gave me a final, longing look. "Thank you," he repeated. Then, in a gentle swirl of light, he faded. This time, the store's lights didn't flicker. Instead, an aura of peace settled around me, an indescribable hush that felt warm, comforting. When I blinked, he was gone. Since that night, I've never seen Henry again. Manny let the memorial stay up for a full week before corporate forced its removal, some nonsense about avoiding lawsuits. We removed it quietly, but in my mind, the memory remains. And for the first time, the store's nights feel lighter. The corners of the aisles don't loom with sorrow, the footsteps from behind me are gone. Reggie says it feels like a weight lifted. I still do the graveyard shift, still endure the hum of fluorescent lights, the dull tasks of restocking shelves. But now, I sense that an invisible presence has left, set free from an endless loop of wandering. I sometimes glance at the spot where we put that memorial, half expecting to see Henry waiting. But each time, I just feel a soft hush, like a spirit exhaling a final goodbye. People ask me if I believe in ghosts. I tell them yes, but only if love or tragedy ties them to a place so deeply they can't move on. Henry's story taught me that ignoring the past doesn't erase it. A place can bury the truth, hush up a violent act, but the echoes remain, drifting in the quiet halls after midnight. If you ever find yourself wandering a 24-hour Walmart at 3 a.m., scanning the aisles for some last-minute purchase, keep your eyes open. If you notice a quiet figure in a faded hoodie, drifting aimlessly, maybe meet his gaze. Ask if he needs help. Because some shoppers never truly check out. And sometimes, all they need is for someone to see them, to acknowledge their presence, so they can finally move on to wherever they belong. For me, I take comfort in knowing Henry's spirit found closure. On nights when the store is particularly empty, I'll stand at that corner, remembering the hush in the air, the gratitude in his eyes. In a world that moves too fast, haunted by tragedies we prefer to forget, maybe acknowledging a lost soul is the kindest thing we can do. Because in the end, we all want to be recognized, to be known, to not vanish without a trace. Now, I watch other late-night customers passing through. They might see a faint flicker at the edge of the aisle or hear a whisper near the back. I smile to myself. Let them imagine it's just the wind or the overhead fans. Only I know the truth, that sometimes, the ones who walk these aisles after midnight aren't just living souls on an errand. Sometimes, a ghost wanders, searching for the exit it was once denied. And if you're lucky, or unlucky, enough, you might catch a glimpse before it slips away forever. Story number 3. The Haunted Receipt. I can't pinpoint the exact moment my life slipped sideways. It might have been the day I moved back to my hometown after my divorce, or maybe the afternoon I signed that lease for an apartment right across from the local supermarket. But if I really had to choose, I'd say it started the moment I got that cursed receipt, a flimsy piece of thermal paper that turned an ordinary grocery run into a living nightmare. My name is Kara Morgan. I'm 34, newly single, and trying to piece my life back together. I relocated to a quiet corner of northern Indiana, a place of endless cornfields, mild summers, and people who say hello even if they only vaguely recall your face from high school. It's unremarkable as far as towns go, the biggest highlight being the new Henderson Supercenter that opened 2 years ago with much fanfare. Everyone said it was a big deal, lowest prices, largest selection, open all night. A city convenience in a small town, the ads boasted. 2 months ago, I snagged a simple office job and settled into a dull routine, work until 6, scrounge a frozen meal from the store, watch Netflix in my lonely living room. I never expected any excitement, or tragedy, or fear. Then everything changed after that grocery trip, when I first saw the writing I swore I hadn't purchased. It was a rainy Tuesday evening. The overhead lights in Henderson Supercenter buzzed faintly, the floors glimmering under the wet footprints of customers fleeing the storm outside. I was exhausted, rummaging the aisles for a quick dinner and some cleaning supplies. The store was quiet, only a few stragglers pushing carts around. I lingered by the freezer doors, picking out a microwavable lasagna, then headed to the checkout. The clerk was a bored teenager with a name tag reading Calvin, scanning items with robotic efficiency. When he handed me my receipt, I glanced at it only out of habit, expecting it to read, lasagna, $4.99, bleach, $2.50, paper towels, $1.99. Instead, my eyes caught something odd, a longer list than I expected. Some items I recognized, my bleach, my lasagna, the paper towels. But the line after that read meat hook, $0, and black bag, $0. My brows furrowed. Then there was a final line, help me. I blinked, certain I was seeing things. Right there, typed in the same dotted thermal ink, help me. My stomach twisted in confusion. Did some glitch cause random text? I fumbled to show Calvin. Hey, I said, voice trembling slightly. You see this? I never bought these items or typed this. Look. Calvin leaned over, the overhead fluorescence flickering on the paper. He squinted, then gave me a confused shrug. Ma'am, it's just your items. Lasagna, bleach, towels. Total $9.48. My skin prickled. No, look here. I tapped the lines that read meat hook, black bag, and especially help me. But the text was gone. The entire second half of the receipt was blank, just smooth white space, followed by the usual store slogan. I froze, breath caught in my throat. I could have sworn I saw that text. Was I hallucinating? My cheeks burned with embarrassment. Calvin gave me a polite lazy smile, as if dealing with a customer meltdown. I muttered an apology, grabbed my things, and hurried into the rain, heart pounding. Maybe stress had me seeing illusions. I arrived home drenched, groceries soaked. As I tossed my coat aside, I checked the receipt again. No sign of anything unusual. I exhaled shakily, told myself it was stress or exhaustion. I tried to forget it. But that night, something gnawed at me. Each time I closed my eyes, I saw those lines: meat hook, $0, black bag, $0, help me. I ended up barely sleeping. The next day, I forced myself to laugh it off. I told my coworker Lily I must have glimpsed someone else's paper or the receipt jammed. She teased me about going insane. Yet a quiet unease lingered, refusing to leave. For days later, it happened again. Another store visit, this time midday. The cashier, a middle-aged woman with the tag Dorothy, handed me a receipt. I stuffed it in my purse. Later at home, as I cleaned up, I found the slip and skimmed it automatically. My eyes snagged on new lines. Cleaner, ammonia $0. Plastic sheets, $0. Help me. The same chilling phrase at the bottom, help me. My stomach dropped. I read the rest: milk, bread, $3.75, and so on. But again, I was certain these extra lines were typed in the same format, but with a price of $0. My hands trembled. I stared, mouth dry. Then, as if on cue, the words blurred right before my eyes, fading into blankness. I nearly dropped the paper. My entire body shook. This wasn't normal. Some glitch? Some twisted joke? Or was I losing my mind? Attempting calm, I took a photo with my phone, hoping to capture it. But the lines refused to appear on the photo. It was just an ordinary receipt in the snapshot. Over the next week, I found myself scanning every receipt. Twice more, random lines popped up: rope, $0, knife, $0, and always a final message: help me. Each time, the text vanished if I tried to show someone. It was horrifying, like a private specter haunting me. The words help me repeated in my head constantly. I started sleeping with the lights on, feeling a creeping paranoia that wouldn't abate. Eventually, I decided to confide in the store manager, Colleen. She was a kind woman in her 40s, always ready with a smile. When I cornered her near the produce section at a quiet hour, she listened earnestly as I described the bizarre lines on my receipts, how they disappeared, how the phrase help me recurred. Her smile froze. She asked to see an example, but of course I had none left, each time the text vanished. She gently suggested I check with the store's IT or call the corporate helpline. I nodded, though I knew how insane it sounded. Our conversation ended awkwardly, but I caught a flicker of alarm in Colleen's eyes. She looked like she recognized something, or dreaded it. That suspicion grew stronger the next day, when I decided to press some employees about any weird goings-on. The cashier Dorothy avoided eye contact, muttering the store was just glitchy. Another associate, Manny, shrugged me off, insisting no one else complained about phantom items or messages. But a young clerk named Rebecca quietly pulled me aside after overhearing. She whispered, "You're not alone." My heart hammered as she told me that for a year or more, a handful of people had reported strange receipts but always dismissed it as stress or pranks. A rumor circulated that the store was cursed, that ex-customers who died violently haunted it. Some employees joked about Henderson's haunting, a half-urban legend. But a chill settled in me. People had died violently here? Rebecca refused to say more. She seemed scared, glancing over her shoulder as if watched. Her final words stuck with me: "Don't talk about it too much, or you'll be singled out." Too late, I thought grimly. I was already singled out, clearly. That night, I scoured local news archives. Found little but typical shoplifting and burglary attempts. Then I stumbled on a hidden story. A year ago, a woman named Annie Parker vanished after shopping at Henderson Supercenter. Security footage showed her entering the store at 11 p.m., but never leaving. The cameras mysteriously cut out around midnight. Police suspected she left unseen or was abducted, but no official conclusion. She was declared missing, presumed dead. Another article from months earlier mentioned a man, Ryan Garcia, disappearing in similar fashion, entering the store, never seen exiting. Management blamed camera malfunctions. My blood ran cold. Could these missing people be connected to the help me messages? Fear multiplied. I started seeing the store differently, each aisle a potential trap, each employee a possible suspect. Because maybe these items, meat hook, knife, plastic sheets, rope, weren't random. They spelled out a murder kit. Was some monstrous killer operating in the store, preying on unsuspecting customers, and the receipts were a desperate cry from the victim's spirits? My pulse raced. But how to prove it? The store's official stance was that no suspicious activity occurred, no bodies found, no suspect identified. Meanwhile, each new grocery run risked another chilling receipt. Yet I had to buy groceries. I had no alternative store in walking distance, and my car was too unreliable to drive across town. So I braced myself, arms prickling with goosebumps, each time I visited Henderson's Supercenter. The next big break came on a stormy evening. The store was nearly empty, thunder rumbling overhead. I clutched my tiny basket, hoping to buy just eggs and cereal. The middle-aged cashier who rung me up was silent, eyes flicking warily. She handed me the receipt with trembling fingers. Already, my heart hammered. I peered down. Eggs, $2.99. Cereal, $3.49. Bucket, $0. Acid, $0. Help me. An involuntary gasp escaped. The final line glowed faintly, as if typed in bold. But as I tried to show the cashier, the text melted off the paper, leaving only eggs and cereal. My hands shook. The cashier looked perplexed, asked if everything was okay. I stammered some excuse, hurried away. I'd barely stepped past the self-check aisles when a voice behind me said, "Wait." I turned to see an old man, maybe in his 60s, wearing a store maintenance uniform. His name tag read Edgar. He looked anxious, glancing around. "I saw you reading your receipt. Was there something strange written on it?" My heart pounded. "Yes," I managed. He swallowed, then whispered, "We need to talk." Over the next tense half hour, we holed up near the seasonal aisle, away from prying eyes. Edgar admitted that he'd worked there since day one, had seen rumors swirl about missing people, and had found random receipts with cryptic pleas for help. He believed a sinister force prowled the store, some twisted killer who lured victims. "I think it might be an employee," Edgar confided, voice trembling. "They manipulate cameras, hide evidence. The store's bigger than you know, with hidden back corridors and old storage rooms from before renovations. Maybe that's where," he trailed off, eyes haunted. "But I can't prove it." I asked about ghosts or leftover spirits. Edgar sighed, nodding. "I think the victims are trying to warn future targets through these receipts. They can't appear physically, so they hijack the register system. But the killer or killers also sabotage it so the evidence disappears quickly. That's why you see it vanish." My stomach twisted. So the phrase "help me" is from a victim's ghost? And these suspicious items, like rope, knife, acid, they're tools the killer used on them? Edgar just nodded, tears brimming in his eyes. Fear coiled around my heart. If that's true, each person who receives the message might be singled out. The next victim. Me. Over the following days, I was a wreck. Each shift at the office felt dreamlike, my mind fixated on the store. Did the killer watch me? Was it a manager, or maybe the night stalker? Was Manny or Dorothy or Calvin involved? Or was it just one monstrous individual hidden among normal employees? I jumped at every shadow. My nights were plagued by nightmares, a figure in a store uniform cornering me in a deserted aisle, brandishing a metal hook or sloshing acid. The missing victims swarmed my dreams, faces contorted in silent screams, receipts taped to their foreheads reading "Help ME." I considered avoiding Henderson's Supercenter altogether, but that fear ironically drew me back. I wanted to solve it, or at least help the trapped souls. If their spirits truly reached me, maybe I was meant to do something. Then again, maybe I was just a fool risking my life. Finally, I mustered the courage to do a stealth investigation. Late one Tuesday, I parked discreetly near the back lot, slipped inside the store, and wandered, searching for anomalies. The store was quiet, past 11 p.m. The overhead music played softly. I pretended to shop, filling a cart with random items. In reality, I was scanning for hidden doors, suspicious staff. Around midnight, I glimpsed movement near the home improvement aisle. A worker in a black jacket was pushing a cart of cleaning supplies. Something about his silhouette or the way he moved made me uneasy. I followed at a distance, hugging corners. He turned down a deserted corridor labeled Employees Only. My pulse spiked. I risked stepping closer, peering through the crack. Inside was a large utility area lined with shelves of store fixtures. The man was rummaging behind a metal rack. I saw a huge metal door I'd never noticed. A faint odor of chemicals drifted out. My heart hammered. Was this some secret lair? Suddenly, the man turned. Our eyes met. It was Manny, the assistant manager, who'd once dismissed my concerns. His expression froze. "What are you doing back here?" he demanded, voice tense. I stammered an apology, claiming I got lost looking for the restroom. Manny's eyes flickered with something like anger or fear. "This is off limits," he snapped. "Customers can't be here. Go on out." My breath caught. I retreated, blood roaring in my ears. That night, I found another horrifying receipt in my bag, though I swear I never checked out. It read, "Tub, $0. Chain, $0. Help me." Now I was certain Manny was involved. The next day, Edgar discreetly told me Manny had been present during multiple suspicious staff disappearances, too. Some employees never returned after night shifts. Officially, they quit without notice. My hands shook as I realized Manny might be the sadistic murderer. If so, how did he do it? The store is huge, plenty of hidden corners, plus control over cameras. The missing victims could have been subdued in that locked area, their remains disposed of. My stomach churned at the thought. Edgar and I hatched a plan. We'd gather solid evidence, photos, logs, anything, to blow the whistle. That might free the ghosts from their purgatorial loop, or at least expose Manny. We arranged for me to hang around near closing, while Edgar discreetly took the keys to the back corridors. If Manny was up to something, we'd catch him. We chose a night with a skeleton crew, fewer potential witnesses Manny might harm. Past midnight, the store quieted. I pretended to do normal shopping while Edgar slipped away to unlock that large metal door I'd seen Manny using. We had walkie-talkies. "All good," Edgar's voice crackled. "Door open." I'm inside. My heart pounded as I approached the corridor. Manny was nowhere in sight. Perfect. I ducked behind some boxes, entered the dim corridor. My flashlight trembled in my grip. The industrial space smelled musty, faintly metallic. I found Edgar near a set of old storage rooms. "He's not here," Edgar muttered. "But look." He shone his flashlight on the floor, faint scratch marks, as if something heavy had been dragged. My pulse roared. We followed the scratch lines around a corner, discovering a small locked closet. The padlock was new, shining. Edgar tried keys, none worked. We exchanged a tense glance. "We have to break it," I whispered. Edgar nodded, retrieving a small crowbar from his belt. He pried at the padlock, muscles straining. The door gave with a snap. A musty stench wafted out, turning my stomach. We lifted our flashlights inside, beams cutting across the gloom. Inside, a horrifying sight, scattered plastic sheets stained dark, piles of rope, containers of bleach, just like the items I'd seen on my phantom receipts. My eyes burned with tears. In the corner lay battered personal effects, a purse, a phone cracked in half, some torn clothing. My mind reeled, these must belong to the missing victims. I covered my mouth to stifle a cry. Edgar cursed under his breath, stepping back in horror. The final nail in the coffin, a fresh notebook listing potential targets. My name was there, circled. Kara Morgan, next. Terror battered me. Manny was indeed the killer. He used store supplies as murder weapons, disposing of evidence in this hidden closet. The receipts I'd been receiving were ghostly warnings from the dead, each line referencing the tools Manny used to kill them. My chest constricted. We had to flee, call the police. But footsteps approached, heavy, purposeful. Manny's voice drifted from the corridor, low and menacing. I know you're in here. Edgar and I locked eyes, terror flooding. We clicked off our flashlights, pressing to the wall. Manny's silhouette appeared, brandishing something metallic, maybe a crowbar. He let out a cold laugh. Thought you were clever, huh? Meddling in business that's not yours. Adrenaline surged. Edgar lunged, slamming the door shut, throwing his weight against it. Manny pounded from outside, shouting curses. You'll never make it out alive, he roared, voice echoing like a demon. The door rattled violently. We were trapped in the murder closet, ironically, but at least Manny was outside. Edgar looked at me, panic in his eyes. We can't stay here. We rummaged the room for something, anything. Found a small air vent near the floor. Edgar hastily pried it open. The gap was big enough to crawl through if we exhaled every breath of air. Meanwhile, Manny's efforts to break in escalated. The door hinges squealed. We scrambled, me first, squirming into the vent. My body felt suffocated by the metal walls. Edgar followed. Behind us, Manny's final blow rang out as the door burst open, his footsteps clanging on the floor. We clung to silence in the vent's darkness, stifling gasps. Manny's furious curses echoed. Then he must have realized the vent was open. You can't hide forever, Manny hissed. I'll find you. We crawled blindly, the vent twisting. My knees scraped raw. The smell of dust filled my nostrils. The only light was from Edgar's phone, guiding us forward. We prayed Manny wouldn't track us or flash a light inside. Minutes felt like hours. Finally, we reached a rusted grate that opened into the main store near the receiving docks. We kicked it out, dropping onto the polished floor. I nearly sobbed in relief. The store was silent. Manny's voice was nowhere near. We sprinted, ignoring the stares of a lone night stalker. We flung ourselves out the automatic doors, into the parking lot. Edgar and I collapsed behind a car, calling 911 with trembling hands. Within 15 minutes, cops arrived, swarming the store. Manny tried to slip out the back but was apprehended. The evidence in that closet sealed his fate. Over the next days, the remains of multiple victims were found in hidden compartments behind walls, including Annie Parker. The story exploded in local news. Henderson Supercenter harbored a serial killer manager for over a year, aided by camera manipulations and hush-hush cover-ups. Corporate faces scandal and lawsuits. Manny confesses to at least 5 murders, though the final toll might be higher. He is indicted for life. As for me, the terror lingers. I gave statements to the police, describing how the ghostly receipts guided me to the truth. The cops smirked, chalking it up to intuition. No official mention of supernatural phenomena. But I know better. The spirits of Manny's victims reached out, imprinting their pleas onto random receipts. Only certain eyes could see them, maybe those open to the possibility of the uncanny. Each item Manny used to kill, each action he took, manifested in the receipts. And the final words helped me was the victim's combined cry. In the following days, with Manny behind bars, the store reopened under new management. The rumor is that the haunting stopped. No more phantom lines on receipts. The ghosts, perhaps, found peace once their killer was exposed. I like to think so. I still dream about them, Annie, Ryan, the unknown faces, like they come to me in a calmer state, saying, "Thank you, we're free now." I've since moved out of that apartment across the street. The memory was too raw. I found a place a few towns over, near my new job. But I still shop at grocery stores, obviously, and every single time I glance at the receipt. It's a habit I can't break. My pulse quickens, half expecting to see meat hook, $0, black bag, $0, or that dreadful help me. Instead, I see normal items, normal totals, every time. But a piece of me wonders, what if, somewhere else, some lost soul is scrawling a cry for help on a receipt, trying to warn another unsuspecting customer of hidden evil? The world is big, and darkness hides in everyday corners, like a 24-hour supercenter that looks innocent under fluorescent lights, until you glimpse the flicker of something monstrous in its bowels. I keep one old battered receipt pinned to my bulletin board. The day Manny was arrested, I found it in my pocket, a final leftover from the haunted stack. The text is now blank, of course. But I'll never forget the lines that once appeared in faint thermal ink: acid, $0, knife, $0, help me. That ephemeral message saved my life and ended a killer's reign of terror. Sometimes, the smallest slip of paper can hold the loudest scream if only we have the eyes to see it. So if you ever notice your receipt reading items you didn't buy, or catch a fleeting phrase, help me, that vanishes when you try to show someone, please don't ignore it. Maybe it's just a glitch. Or maybe, just maybe, a victim's spirit is reaching out, desperate to stop the horror that lurks behind those glossy aisles. Pay attention, because your receipt might be the diff.